Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm building my RB1 today, and it's a pretty cool chassis. I'm kind of digging it. One thing I really like about it is, how I like to run heat sinks. Well, I can still have my heat sinks on the side of the motor, and this 3D print bumps out the rails of it enough that it clears with no problem. In fact, it looks like there's about 3 millimeters between the heatsink and the rail of the chassis, and that's fantastic. I could actually have probably put even a second one on there if I wanted to. In fact, there is on the inside, but a third one maybe even. I might switch this up and throw a barrage motor in there because it looks like there's room for it, and I think it'd be a little stronger than the stock setup here. So that's probably going to happen. I'm going to pre-assemble the cage before I do anything else. One note on the RB1 I've found out so far is I was warned that this would probably be the case. I've taken a body reamer and opened up all the holes for the screws to go through just a little bit. Not enough that I'm going to lose friction, but enough that I'll be able to actually get the screw to go in. They were pretty tight, and I don't want to break anything. 3D printed parts aren't super strong, but they're very, very light. And you have to be kind of careful when you put them together or they'll snap. One thing I also noticed is the dimple holes that correspond to the little bumps on the side here, this bump and this bump, the ones right there and right there, they're basically little alignment pins, and they help you determine whether, or not whether, but where it goes. And there's one dimple here, one dimple here, and on the print itself they're not quite large enough. So I've got a X-Acto knife with a broken tip on it, and I'm just putting it in there and kind of hogging out the hole a little bit. I still want it to be an index for the skid plate, but it doesn't need to be super tight. So I'm just opening those a little bit, and I'll make sure that the screws can go through. I don't want them to go through super tight because it is a 3D printed part, and I don't want the plastic to crack. So there's a balance between having enough meat left and enough of a hole to get your structural screws through to put the thing together. So I'm just going to go through all these holes and make sure they're appropriately sized before I put it together, because it'll make the entire assembly process so much easier, and it takes only a minute or two. Not a big deal. So anyway, that's the note for now. I'll let you know more if I see something else. I had to look at a picture, but I was able to put it together. This piece with the arrowhead looking component goes in the top, and another thing I did a little bit was clean up these joint areas so that the pieces would go together really well, and they did. It's a good strong piece. I do like the fact that there's double screws back here. This one got a little bit messier right there, but I'll live with it. You have to use the shortest screws. I would like to see the hole be a little deeper so you can use longer screws here. That's the only thing I would change so far on it, but a little bit deeper pocket for the screws to go into would be recommended if you're watching this, and for future design change. But other than that, I like how strong that is. It's a good looking cage. Should be able to take a tumble. The back piece is this one, and it goes in here with the bump up on the bottom. So I'll spread that apart and get it bolted in next. And for the 3D printing people out there, this is one thing that I would like to say. When you have a piece that is going to, well, supposed to fit inside of another piece, like in the corner there, when you do your print or your design work, leave a little extra space maybe so that you can make sure that seats all the way in there. There's just a little gap in there that is not a big deal, but I wish it wasn't there. When you have it so that I mean, this is a strong chassis, and I just would have liked to have seen that sit a little deeper in. Not really a complaint, it's just something that I'm saying is going to make future designs stronger, that if the structure itself helps hold itself together rather than the screws, it's going to be a better design. But overall, this is super strong. It's got lots of room inside. The only thing I'm going to have to figure out is where to put the battery, because there's literally nothing I've seen yet that is going to show me where the battery or the ESC should sit. The good thing about this design is there's plenty of room that I can do anything I want in there. It's huge. The inside of this is big, and it's a very lightweight chassis, so a lot of possibilities for people who like to, you know, mess around and have the space to move things. I've got the cage built to put in. I'm still debating whether I should throw a barrage motor in there. Thinking I should take that back out and do that. Yep, this is going to be a heavy build because I've got a brass skid plate, and I think that extra torque is going to be a good thing. Anytime I build a new rig or install a new motor, before I even put it in the rig, I run it to make sure it sounds like it's running free. And this one did need a little modification to get it to work right. In fact, there was not enough adjustment in the plate here, and just happens I have a red anodized barrage motor plate, which is going to be really cool with my red chassis. But what I had to do in order to get enough gear spacing here was actually bend the plate, and what I did was I put it on the side and I bent this side that has the motor back a little bit, and that was actually what it took in order to get that gear spacing right. Sometimes you got to bend the plate. There's just not enough adjustment in the holes themselves. At every step along the way, like adding the transmission cover plate, I'll run it again to make sure it's still free and sounds correct. And then I'll put one drive shaft on at a time and test it in between. That way, if I get a load somewhere, I'll know exactly which thing it is that's actually loading the transmission. This is something I was really happy to see with the Endura links. And what you'll notice here is this machined out area is triangulating the link in that area. Let's see if I can get it to focus. There it is. But see how that's cut out? I've been doing that to my plastic links for a while now, and that is pretty much how much you actually have to take out, but really only on this side to clear the drive shaft, because the drive shaft comes in from the driver's side to the center. This side isn't quite as critical. They didn't have to machine out that much, but this part here has to be scooped out pretty far back, or the drive shaft will hit it at full compression on the left and full extension on the right. Anytime the axle pivots this way, if that's not cut out, it's going to hit. I'm really glad to see that, because I won't have to Dremel it myself. Also, the Endura links have no resistance in them whatsoever. That's pretty good. I don't know how they're going to pivot side to side, because there is only a certain amount that they can do, but what I'm hoping for is that that tiny bit that they can pivot will be enough. So I'm going to pause this here. I've got the hard one put in. These spacer ball joint links here really don't want to fit into these channels very well. I'm kind of having to jam them in there, and they're fitting, but man, is it tight. It's like they're the same exact thing. and they just fit, but you got to force them in. So that's actually a front link. I have these Enjora ones. They're pretty cool. I'm going to find out if the bottom ones hit the top ones at full compression on both ways it can flex once the axles are on, and if I need to, I'll Dremel some of the metal away, and you'll never notice it, but I will. Anyway, I'd rather it be right than limit the articulation just because I didn't want to scratch up a piece of metal. That's dumb. So it's going to be right mechanically when I put it together, but you can see how it's going to be, and we'll do more after I walk my dog. And before I go, I want to show you one more thing. These links, you have to put together all the ball joints yourself, and there is a big side and a little side. I don't know if you can see the size difference there, but I'm putting all the big sides on the outside of my truck because I think they will interfere with the articulation the least. So that's why I'm doing that. Anyway, I'll get that shoved in there, and I'll screw it in later. But these links are pretty nice, and this cage is pretty nice too. I like that. And one of the things that's good and bad about it is there is no internal structure for you to mount anything, and if you're creative, you can come up with your own, and you can put anything you want anywhere in there, and it's going to be good. I think I'm going to put my ESC in the back, similar to the E1, and my battery, I'm going to have a cover that will cover the motor and drop down from the front here and then drop down to the side, so you won't see the motor necessarily, but I'm going to try to make my battery sit in the chassis at an angle, probably like that, because I'll be able to put the battery really low. It's going to sit down by the bottom of the center of gravity, I should say, will be low. It'll be down probably lower than any other battery in any of my other trucks. So I think that'll be a good thing. Here's a tip for 3D printed builders. If you start screwing a screw into the frame rail and you start seeing a gap form between your skid plate and the frame rail, the screw's not going in right, and if you keep cranking on that, this will eventually pull out and snap this right here. So keep an eye on that as you tighten these in, and make sure that the screw can go all the way through before you crank it down. If you send it home early, you're gonna mess stuff up. So I'm gonna find out. Let's put something. Yeah, it's there we go. Now I've got the screw all the way. The file has gone all the way through it, and pretty sure I can put this in there now. It's probably straight enough that it's going to find its way in, but I'm going to make sure that that sidewall doesn't start bowing out again, because if it does, and there it is, it's not quite lined up. There, felt a pop, so I think it's sending itself home that time. Anyway, just watch out for that when you're putting 3D chassis together. I'm finding yet another area where the SCX24 may have rubbing issues, and it's this bolt right here gets into the steering, or I'm sorry, the suspension link that comes out of there. So there's 3 others, and I'm just going to pull that one out. I don't see that as being an entirely necessary screw, and it's just not going to have one there. It'll be alright, but by removing that, it's going to now allow my suspension link to move freely, where before it was jamming up. Yeah, that was locking it up before with that screw. Now I could have probably tightened it down more, but it's not necessary. So it's gone. I won't need it. Never miss it. This could be an Endura link thing, but I'm noticing that there's not very much room between the link and the transmission housing there, and it is causing a bit of resistance. That's not dropping, it's kind of stuck. So I'm going to figure out how to deal with that. I may pull out the inner little O-ring on this one and just live without it. I'll see if that works, because I really don't want to grind on them if I don't have to, but I do want them to work smoothly. I've taken the inner O-ring out and it's still touching the transmission housing, so I'll show you what I'm going to do. You see how they have a 90-degree edge on that? I'm just going to round the top portion of this off on the inner part of that with the Dremel tool, and then it should clear it just fine and move freely like the bottom, or like the other side. I'll show you what it looks like after it's done. So what I've done is just rounded that edge off. I may just take a little off the top too, just the top face of it. You'll never see it because it will be on the part of the rig where you just can't see it. There's things in the way. It's not going to reduce the strength in a measurable way, but it is going to make it work a lot more freely. I've got both the O-ring retainers back in, and we'll see how it does. That was perfect. There's no resistance on that anymore. The entire suspension moves freely. So it's ready for axles. Another note on that, it's not just NHX that does it, they all do it. The only one I've seen that didn't do it was the Twin Hammers, and that thing is out of production, probably because they did it right. Now I'm going to show you how I fix this. I'm going to get my razor knife and I'm going to make a line parallel to that suspension link on that one, and I'm going to scrape a line parallel on this one right here. So now I've got some lines that are scored on that metal. This is brass and this is brass, but those lines there, I'll zoom it in, probably can't see it, yeah you can, right here and right here, that is where the links are hitting the skid plate, and that's how much material needs to be removed. I'm comfortable doing that myself because it's metal and it's going to take away some of the threads, but I don't care. I'd rather have a suspension that can move freely. Another thing I'm going to do is take off all the sharp edges here. Like I already told you guys, I don't like 90-degree angles on moving pieces. So I'm going to round off all these edges here, this corner, and this is another place shouldn't have sharp edges. These need to be rounded, because if they do happen to hit a moving piece, they'll slide past each other far more easily. Alright, that is where I grounded off, and that is where I grounded off, and I showed you how I did it, and look at that. It now can go clear through, no stopping, no restrictions, the way it was supposed to be. I mean, if a street car was designed the way these are, nobody would drive them. They'd be dangerous because suspensions wouldn't move, they'd bottom out. Second a suspension bottoms out on the highway, you suddenly go to infinite spring rate and you lose control of your vehicle if you're in a turn. So but that's the angle it took, that cut angle, in order for these links to clear. That's pretty bad. I'm not picking on NHX. They all do it, like I said, but they all do it, so it's worth mentioning. Another thing I'm finding out is these links don't have enough pivot in them, and what I'm going to do is take the rubber band little O-rings off the end here, and that will free that end up a little bit. Please don't take this the wrong way when I mention this, but I am having a time trying to get these shock upper mounts to screw into the mount hole right here. These holes are just a little small, so I'm having to open them up with a body reamer and then go back through with one of these pin files and make space, because they are just not going in. I should have opened them up a little more on the back side too. Alright, here's what I'm talking about. These holes are too tight. I just literally twisted the end of the shock right off the top of that, and now I've got that stuck in there with no way to get it out. I'll have to open up one of these other holes or do something different here. Okay, report now is I have taken one of the O-rings off the inner side of both of these. I decided to leave the outer ones because they'll help space this link away from the freshly ground skid plate. And I left the outer O-rings in, but they don't need to be there. I mean, the inner ones don't need to be there. Outer ones don't either, but this is a location where the link cannot slide off of the ball joint, so it's not necessary. I think in the back I'm going to do the same thing, because I'm going to get a lot more articulation out of the back, and with the flex blade and the kinetic shock, so I may actually take the inner O-ring off both the front and back for the rear suspension. We'll see. I'm going to try a different way other than the pin files to make this happen. And what I've got is a small butane torch that I'm going to heat the end of this thing up orange hot, and I'm going to poke it right through that hole. Alright. Now I have something that hopefully I can work with. The butane torch method works so well, I'm going to revisit the front side, and I'm just going to put another hole right next to it, and I'll just burn it right through and send it home. It's just right next to it. I'm going to call that good. And normally I wouldn't care, but the right front is kind of important for climbing. You don't want that to be able to stand up much if you want to climb, because this is the last wheel that leaves the ground before it tips over backwards. So you want that pinned down as well as you can, just to keep the body held down forward. So I'm happy with that. It's just a millimeter farther back than it should have been, but perfect. Well, because I've used a barrage motor, here's the next issue I'm facing. When this suspension compresses, I'll show you here if I can get this magnet off my screwdriver. Right there, the link is actually hitting the motor. And you know my rule in RC here, nothing is sacred. I'm going to actually notch that suspension link. I don't care that they're Endura links. It does not bother me to do that. So it's getting notched, and it'll still be plenty strong. I'm not worried about that, but they're eventually going to get scratched up anyway. But I do want that extra clearance, because right now it's hitting the motor and stopping the motion. That's not okay. Well, this project's taken a little bit longer than I thought it would. The good news is I got everything on it the way it should be, so I'm happy about that. And I have full articulation in both directions now. The non-motor side and the motor side. Under the car's own weight, it will never compress on both sides. That's the only time that it still hits the motor. I could grind some more, and I may later, but I don't want to really make it visible that I ground on it. So Still, it is not visible, so I'm happy about that. And yeah, I do need to grind a little more. But anyway, the way it is now, I can get full articulation in both directions, front and back. And it's pretty much sitting where I want it to sit. Tomorrow, I will do the interior. And what I mean by the interior is I will get the battery and ESC mounted. But in order to get that mounted, there's some stuff I have to do. I'm going to build the shelves for everything. And like I said, I'll probably put the ESC clear in the back. I might put it over here. That'd be a better place. I still need to be able to reach it to get the battery in and out, but I don't think it'll be too much of a problem. And this is already a shortened ESC cord, so it might be good to keep the ESC forward, and for weight purposes the battery forward as well. But so far I like how it's turned out. It's turning out to be more work than I expected, but anytime you do something that was never intended, you'll have to face things that you never expected, and this is no different. When it's done though, I'm expecting it to do some really cool stuff, so it'll be worth the time building it. Okay, this is the last thing I'm going to do tonight. I went ahead and ground away a little more of that link that's right underneath the motor, and now it has full travel and just barely doesn't touch the motor, but that is now perfect. I can replace that with a torque beast. It's the same basic can, where before, if this thing went to full compression, it was literally pushing up on the motor, and that was not okay. It was also pushing on that lead, which wasn't okay either, because I don't want to electrify the link. So not that it would hurt it, but I just don't want to. But anyway, that's all for tonight, and we'll do some more tomorrow and get it running on the course.